We're going to switch gears to another great plenary session here on where action is happening in this country, and that's often at the state level. If I could ask the panelists to please come up here for the next session. We all know that we're not getting any climate leadership out of Washington. We know, if anything, it's clearly well, I'm not sure I can come up with any pleasant words to describe what's emanating out of Washington, to be perfectly frank. But what we are seeing is just a tremendous amount of action at the state level. Hey, Fran? I want to kick this off by just introducing our fabulous moderator for this session. It's truly an honor to introduce Fran Pavley to all of you. You already heard from Terry many of her accomplishments, but they are definitely worth repeating. Fran has nearly 30 years as an elected leader in the state of California. She's a local, born here in LA, and she was the first mayor of Agoura Hills in 1982, out in my neck of the woods. She served in the California Assembly and in the Senate. And as we heard yesterday, you got to, from Jared Blumenfeld, you got to remember the numbers when you're coming here to California. Fran was instrumental behind AB 1493, AB 32, SB 32, and many others. All of you are well aware of AB 32 as the Global Warming Solutions Act, and Fran was that tip of the spear in the California legislature that made it all happen. It's really an honor to introduce her as the moderator. I'm going to turn the session over to her now and look forward to the discussion. Fran?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure for me to be here. I'm a native Angelino, and just looking every time I come downtown, something new is going on in this city. We're revitalizing ourselves. After Terry Tamanen's amazing speech, is Terry still here? That's inspirational, and I already feel inadequate that we haven't done more. In California, we try to do as much as we can. It's hard work, and I know in New York and in Oregon. So we're going to share a little bit of stories with you on what's going on in other states. We know at the subnational level, it's even more important that we step up now, especially with what's going on in Washington, D.C., in the Trump administration. So let me introduce to you three panelists here today from three different states. First of all, California State Senator Bob Wieckowski, to my left. He was just recently reelected to a second term. That's correct, Bob?
That is
2018, correct. Through the wisdom of the voters. And in California, just so you know, I like to let people know, a state senator represents about 1 million people. Way more than a member of Congress. It's a full-time job plus one. He represents people primarily in Alameda and Santa Clara counties. I've heard that's up north.
Yes,
right?
Somewhere over
there.
Yeah,
up there. I served with Bob for 4 years or longer. And in fact, we attended the Paris COP conference in 2014. Bob focuses on job creation, clean technologies, and protecting the environment. He chairs the Budget Subcommittee of Resources, Environmental Protection, Energy, and Transportation. I found out he was a bankruptcy attorney. I didn't know that. Good. And he earned a BA from Cal and a law degree from Santa Clara University. So, Bob, thank you very much for coming. I thought I'd introduce all three, and then we'll speak for 5 minutes each. Since I'm moderating, I get to decide what we're doing on the fly here. To my left, Oregon Representative Karin Power. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's Karin.
Karin.
It's okay.
I have to write
it looks
like car.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Apologize. She was elected to office in November 2016. In addition to her work in the Oregon legislature and the Freshwater Trust, Representative Power is a board member of the Oregon Food Bank. Power is committed to progress for our environment, stronger communities, and better schools, and for equity and equality. She's a graduate from Lewis and Clark Law School, and she puts her years of environmental law experience to work advocating for cleaner air and water for the beautiful state of Oregon. Last but not least, all the way from New York City, probably use the most greenhouse gas emissions.
Unfortunately, especially from Albany.
Oh, that's true. That's where your capital is. I keep forgetting that. Jared Snyder from New York is the treasurer for RGGI. You probably all know what that acronym is, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative from the North England states, Mid-Atlantic.
Yes.
You can share with us more on that. And he also serves on the board of directors. He is the Deputy Commissioner for Air Resources, Climate Change, and Energy at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He has been with the department since 2007. He oversees New York's development and implementation of clean air programs and programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Snyder has a BA in economics from Cornell University and a law degree from Harvard. Thank you all three for being here today. And I've asked them each in about 5 minutes or so, share a few climate policies or challenges in their state, or maybe some recent success stories that would be of interest to this audience. Bob?
Let the out-of-staters go first, and then,
Oh, that's
because these
good.
guys know what California's doing, right?
I hope so. Well, we'll
Or I
find
can go.
out.
Listen.
Or you take all the blame for any problems. And,
Well, I can fill in what we're doing or
okay,
what we're
so
not doing.
Bob, who do you want to go first?
Karin.
Karin. So that was a good test question. Yes. So thank you very much for coming. And you're relatively new to the politicals.
I am.
Wars.
And especially to climate policy. My background is in doing large-scale restoration projects for my day job. Oregon is a citizen legislature, so we meet on years like this, we meet for 6 months roughly, and then we go back to our day jobs. On odd-numbered years, no, even-numbered years. You can tell how long I've been just working on cap and trade in Oregon. I can't think of anything else. On even-numbered years, we meet for about 5 weeks. So my day job is as an in-house counsel for a large-scale habitat restoration organization. When I was elected in 2016, my speaker put me on all of our environmental committees. So that's all I did. I was elected at the same time as my good friend Pam Marsh down in Ashland. And we both ran because we cared about the environment and really wanted to elevate that. Oregon's known for its strong environmental heritage, and we've been resting on that, I think, for too long.
Yeah, right.
And we wanted to push the envelope and move the ball down the line, I think, on a few other policies a little bit more quickly. For my colleague, Representative Marsh, she's getting socked in with smoke. I think, many of your colleagues can empathize in California for more than a month at a time. And she has one of our largest cultural events in Oregon, which is the Ashland Shakespeare Festival.
Right.
And they've been having to cancel events altogether. And it's, a huge economic hit to the region. So I'll fast forward to this year. As I joke, my good colleague, Senator Michael Dember, who's my co-chair of our Joint Carbon Committee in the state of Oregon, says I have a prop. My prop is my almost 3-year-old son, who will be exactly my age when I first started politics in 2050. So I think the nice thing about electing the next generation of those who can continue to help support the work that you all are already doing is we now have tiny human beings who we desperately want to preserve a recognizable planet for. So we cannot work fast enough, in my opinion, on this. Because I grew up in New Jersey, and the river I grew up on no longer freezes in the winter. My sister lives in Denver, and it snowed 2 weeks ago and then was 80 degrees. I mean, it was interesting just to hear how many of my generation are beginning to run for office because climate change is a real threat to our kids and to us having a long-term career in certain segments. So that's sort of my background and how I came to this work. My speaker, as I joke, gave me one job this session. She pulled me off of all of the other environmental committees I was on previously on our budget committee, and now I'm just on 2 committees, Judiciary Committee, which makes my law degree and law school debt worth it, and I'm co-chair of our Joint Carbon Committee, which is unprecedented. Our leadership in both the Senate and the House formed this committee over the last year, And it's Senator Dembro's job and mine to get it over the finish line.
I had the pleasure of talking to him on the phone a few weeks ago, and congratulations to you. That's an important committee, and Oregon's doing some amazing things that we'll talk about in just a minute. So we're going to go over here. I guess Bob's going to clean up today.
Okay.
So Jared, New York's done an amazing job as well, and in fact, at the AB 32 bill signing, Governor Pataki came all the way to San Francisco to join in that.
Yep,
It was a
yep.
bipartisan platform of people there to celebrate.
And in the
passage of the
Northeast,
bill.
it's still bipartisan, and I'll get into that.
Okay.
Maybe not with my opening. Karin, I was hearing you mentioning your 3-year-old son. I was just thinking, I had a 3-year-old son when I started working on climate change and this challenge, and he's now working in the clean energy world, in the energy storage world. So it shows a couple of things. It's been 20 years that I've been working on this, and we've made some progress. We do have an energy storage industry in New York now, and the progress that's being made in some places like California and New York and some of the other states is tremendous, but there is still so much more to be done. In that 20 years, the Earth has continued to warm, emissions have continued to increase. And so I think it's really important that we have this conversation today about what is working. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about Governor Cuomo's focus on a clean electricity system in New York and how that's really the foundation of where we are going and how we're going to meet some very aggressive emission reduction goals. From a clean energy perspective, we have a 50% clean energy standard, 50% renewable energy by 2030. Governor Cuomo has called for that to be increased to 70% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% zero carbon energy by 2040. And there's really 3 pillars of getting there. One is onshore renewables, that's big wind farms, increasingly solar projects. Solar has increased in the last decade from essentially 0 generation to 1,500 megawatts, and about that much more is already in the pipeline. There's a number of challenges. And we're working closely with, we don't have the wide open spaces in New York like there are in Iowa and Texas and some of the places with a lot of wind. And so we have to spend a lot of time working with communities, getting them to understand the benefits of these projects in their communities. And we also have to protect our environment while we're building these projects, protect our forest lands, our agricultural lands. And so there's a lot of work, but there's a lot of people that are committed to getting that done. So that's one pillar. Second pillar, offshore wind. Governor Cuomo has the nation's leading offshore wind goal of 9,000 megawatts by 2035. And we're making progress on that. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority is issuing RFPs for these power from these projects, which is basically makes the economics work for them. That is moving forward. We're making tremendous progress. There's going to be more coming up fairly soon. There's many benefits from this. We're going to be creating a new industry in the East Coast. It's going to be a center of the offshore wind industry. It's going to be centered in the upper Northeast. So we're creating those jobs. We're finding new uses for our ports. And at the same time, we're going to make sure that we protect the really valuable fishing resource and aquatic resources we have offshore. The third pillar of the clean energy strategy is energy storage. We recognize that the wind's not blowing all the time, the sun's not blowing all the time, especially in New York. I looked at my 10-day weather app today, and I think it's going to be raining every day for the next week in Albany. So we don't necessarily have the best weather, but we do create the solar power, we do create the wind power. The offshore wind, as I said, is going to be huge, but we need to be able to store that power for when we need it. And so we're investing heavily in energy storage. I really believe New York State is becoming the epicenter of energy storage. The governor has a goal of 3,000 megawatts energy storage by 2030, have programs in place to get us there. So that's really how we're going to meet these goals. At the same time as we're working with the other states in the Northeast on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which I'll probably get into a little bit more, and I know there's another panel on that. That's reflecting the emission reductions we're achieving. 50% emission reductions since the day that Governor Pataki was governor. And our cap will require 65% reduction across the region by 2030. And now that low carbon grid is much of the foundation of the rest of our emission reduction. Electrification of transportation, electrification of buildings. In transportation, we're investing heavily in charging infrastructure, up close to $300 million. The state is committing to electric vehicle infrastructure. Seems like there's new announcements, every month on new investments. We're working with California, defending the waiver for the mandate, which is essential to force the market in the right direction. We're providing incentives to consumers. Sales went up 60% in 2018. As a result of those various programs. And we're working with other states in the Northeast and Oregon and California on a MOU to support the electric vehicle market. And finally, we're working on moving our buildings towards plugging into that clean electricity grid as well through ground source heat pumps and similar technologies. And really important, increased energy efficiency, because as we're moving more and more of our economy to electricity, we need to use it very efficiently.
Thank you very much. And later on, I'm going to come back to you on energy storage and also challenge Senator Wieckowski on not letting New York beat us in energy storage. And so why don't you give some opening comments, and then we'll get into some other questions.
I think it's instructive to see what New York is doing and what Oregon is doing, because, California, our legislature passed a clean power, 100% electricity by 2045, and New York, God bless you, 2040. It's a healthy competition that you would say, Oregon's looking at California's cap and trade programs. We've got our warts and our inefficiencies. You learn from that and do a better program. I mean,
they're doing cap and invest, which is similar.
There's that. How about stop giving out free allowances? Jack up the price a little bit. Things that we can do to make the price of carbon more realistic. Even you go back to California had the clean air standards. We adopted it because we had problems. We had this, we're in LA. We had problems that we had to cope with, and the federal government went in and adopted the national standards, and that sort of becomes the norm. The 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue has some ideas of what they want to do with our, emission standards that you worked on so hard. So I think what's happening is we're also getting into this the world of climate adaptation and mitigation. And Senator Pavley knows that I have tried to be a leader in adaptation and want to take California into that next step. We got a bill that's going to put in a chief administrator within the Office of Planning and Research and sort of statutorily set up a structure for, we have a advisory climate adaptation task force, and get some people that know something about replacing infrastructure, planning, because we get a lot of scientists that are on that want to do that, but really help out our regional planners and our local planners. California does a very good job planning horizontally. EPA talks with, Air Board talks with Cal Transportation, but they never go vertically and say, here, regional, the metropolitan planning agencies and the local folks, because people want to do the right thing, I think. Some cities want to, but they're not. As the budget share of the subcommittee that does what resources and energy and transportation and agriculture, I control the dough, right? And we have all these programs, the cap and trade, how we're going to split up the money in cap and trade. You know, obviously, we're sitting here in April of 2019, the fires are a big deal. And there's fires in Oregon, are there fires in Washington, New York?
Do you allow fires?
Not so many. We
Right.
have more flooding and sea level
but
rise.
Try to figure out what's the nice mix. I mean, we have the forestry trust folks came in and we're talking about the high altitudes of this is above the dams. Think above Shasta, Oroville, the big dams, where we've let the watershed has become compromised. We've got so many trees in there that the snow gets caught up in the trees, which looks nice. My wife loves it to see the snow caught in the trees, but what we really want is the snow down on the ground. But we're talking about $4 billion just on the high alpine in California to go in to do the restoration of the wetlands, to create some of these high alpine marshes, to get the tree population down. So when we do have a drought, we don't have a zillion trees trying to suck a little bit of water. And they're saying that could produce 12%, 14% more water in the reservoirs at the top. And it's that sort of climate adaptation, mitigation that's going to reduce greenhouse gases that is an export. That's what we do in California. People expect the technology, whatever Tesla in my district is doing, to export that, and these sort of aggressive climate mitigation, climate adaptation policies, new ideas. That's all I got.
That's very good. So thank you for all those opening comments. I'd throw out a few questions here for responses. You don't have to all three answer to each one, or if there's something that really intrigues me, just feel free to make sure I call on you and you respond. So first of all, I want to thank all three states, California, Oregon, and New York. You mentioned this, Jared, who have adopted California's tailpipe standards. 13 states plus DC have. I haven't done the math, but it's about 40% of all the vehicles in the United States have adopted these cleaner start standards that are part of the MOU that's now subject to the Trump administration's attack and rollback and taking away California's authority to be an incubator and allow us to pass more stringent tailpipe emission standards than the federal government, provided we get a waiver. And we've had that. So thank you for all three. So in, I think, all three states, I'm not sure about New York, but I know Oregon and California, greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles, trucks, buses are number one source of probably air pollutants as well as climate pollution. So what are any of you doing in order to sort of double down on this? Is there some creative programs? What are your priorities for reducing the emissions? We're finding in California with our growing population, after all the work we've done, emissions are actually increasing in the mobile sector, not decreasing. So,
that was December's report.
So,
that came out.
yeah.
Merry Christmas, right?
So, can you think in your state or neighboring states on some creative policies that we might implement in order to reduce emissions even more? What do we need to do? Do you want to talk
Well, I think one of the things that we're doing is we're talking to each other. I mean, Jerry Brown, the global conference in September, had 5,000 people there that came in from different states. There's 18 of us that are on the tailpipe emissions, but there's this under 2 MOU is opportunity for subnationals. You know, when we went to Paris and I was in Poland, I'm going to Chile, I'm a sub 2. I'm just some guy from California, but is elected saying this is what we can do and learn from those folks. You know, I think what it does when you get there, when you meet with other people from other states and around, you rethink what you're doing. You know, in California, take recycling. I mean, it's unbelievable how we think that I drop it in the gray bucket or blue bucket, whatever it is in your town, and that's the end of it. We've gone to single stream, and we realize that it's a failure. It's a failure. The dumps, they don't call them dumps, landfills are getting bigger, and we have to look at what people are doing maybe in Europe, maybe in Oregon. How do people, the best recycling program that we have so that we get the good recycled products actually recycle. It's not wishful recycling, but we reduce our energy and learn from people in that way and just say, okay, we've done some good things, but now we have to redefine it and learn whatever the Norwegians are doing on their bottles and cans.
Well, I think between us all, 40 million, 8 million, how many people in New York? 25?
About 20 million.
20 million people. So collectively, that's a lot of mobile emissions coming out. Does anyone, Karin or Jared, have an idea of how we can ramp up and scale up emissions reduction on the mobile side?
I mean, ideally, we do it without having another recession.
Yes.
That's the point I joke to my colleagues. We have to figure out how to long-term crack the nut of transportation, and we're not going to do it if we continue to use the same fossil fuel inputs that we've been relying on within the last 100 years. It's amazing to me to see the leapfrog in innovation within my lifetime. I mean, I think I will be the last generation to not have grown up without social media, not have grown up without a phone attached at my hip at all times, and yet we're still putting largely the same stuff into our cars as we did.
That's true.
Decades and decades ago. So I think it will be sector specific as well to try to change behavior and then provide people with other options. I think Oregon, following in California's footsteps, negotiated an EV rebate to kind of help move that along and offer some on-the-hood incentives, but we're finding that car dealerships don't have a great cost incentive to sell more EVs because the lifetime ownership cost is much, much less than a gas-powered vehicle.
That's a good.
So that's a learned
good point,
behavior
yeah.
and an economic disincentive issue that we have to get over.
So Jared,
Yeah,
what do you do?
the flip side
Go
of
ahead.
the flip side of that though is from the owner perspective, the lifetime costs are much lower. They're saving money while the money that the dealers aren't making is because consumers are not spending money on maintenance. I mean, I have an electric vehicle. I'm embarrassed to say I've never even opened the hood, and I've had it for like 4 years. I mean, because there is no maintenance required in the vehicle, and it's a pleasure to drive. So one of the things we're focused on with the other states in the Northeast is an educational program. Actually, I think it's the whole ZEV MOU state, so Oregon and California involved as well. An educational program, a partnership with the manufacturers to educate the public about the benefits and availability of electric vehicles. Because there is a tremendous amount of unawareness among the public of that option. Let me mention just a couple other things. I talked about electrification, because in the long run, you plug in transportation to the zero electricity grid, and you have solved transportation. Along the way, you want to use transportation more efficiently. Part of that is relying on transit, less in single occupancy vehicles. New York, this year, the legislature passed the congestion pricing program for New York City, the first of its kind in the nation, which will provide significant support for the transit system of the New York City metro area. Something like 15 million people or so, including Long Island, New York City, the suburbs, are relying on the transit system, and this provides a revenue source to support that transit system at the same time as it provides an disincentive for people to drive their cars into New York City. That will have tremendous health benefits that you mentioned. And it's not just the pollutants like ozone that we think of, but it's pollutants like benzene that come from fossil fuels and other such toxic emissions. So that's one thing that is a great step forward. Another thing that we're doing is we work with our communities. We have a Climate Smart Community program, about 250 communities in New York State, give or take a couple dozen, have pledged to be climate smart communities. We work with them on strategies to reduce emissions from transportation. And we have an incentive program that is specifically tailored towards municipalities to buy electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure. They don't get to take advantage of the tax rebates, on the federal level because they don't pay taxes. So we're providing them with very significant incentives so they can go out and buy electric vehicles for their fleets. And it's a use that makes a lot of sense because municipalities are using the fleets around town. They're not driving large distances where they might want access to a vehicle that has much longer range. Electric vehicles right now are perfect for that use. So.
And they are. I can add one thing to this. Some exciting work has been done with electrifying buses. The transition, because the life cycle of a bus is about 25 years, but when that is done, you're going to have to switch to electric buses. We're seeing it in cities and around the state, fleets of buses. And an exciting thing for California is we actually have bus companies manufacturing electric buses here, Proterra,
They're
and
my
BYD,
district.
and they're down here too.
right.
And so we're seeing, that makes an amazing difference. Zero emission buses.
Right.
And the fleets are the way to sell it. And so we're going to look at
Yeah.
Uber and Lyft, right?
And the school buses are
Yes.
also, but the other thing is that, we're dating ourselves up here because the mobility challenges or the mobility equation for people in the future is that they're not going to own cars. We're going to have these autonomous vehicles. They're going to come in. They're going to be, electric, and people are going to. The challenge is that vehicle miles travel, because somebody did a study that said if you get chauffeured around, you go about 40% more than what you normally would. So one of the challenges is that the young millennials, they don't have cars. They use the Ubers and the Lyfts, but trying to figure out that mobility link. And the challenge that we have, not so much you guys, is that we don't have the rail answer. We don't have, our high-speed rail is, challenged, but even the money, we put 10% of our cap and trade into the interrail connection. It's just weak. If you want to go to your part of the world or up to Santa Barbara, I think, what is it, like 8 hours to get on a bus or a train to Santa Barbara? It's just not handy.
No, we have a lot to work on getting people out of their cars
get to Riverside.
and then making them cleaner cars.
Fran, could I mention
yes,
one other thing
you
just
may.
on the buses? I agree completely on the electric buses and in
Are
New
we
York.
out doing New York on the electric buses?
I'm sorry?
Are we out doing New York?
I'd say right now, but we're on the move. We've committed to invest 2/3 of the Volkswagen mitigation money in electrification.
yes.
And much of that is going to electric
that's right.
transit buses. And
Yes.
there's a lot of interest from our fleets in taking advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah.
God bless
Actually,
Volkswagen.
Let me follow up on that too. Yes, I know, no kidding. The only source of revenue to do any kind of diesel emission reductions right now in Oregon. So we are well behind the state of California in enacting any kind of diesel phase-out mandate. So and I think this speaks to the difficulty in moving our freight towards a cleaner option. There
Our
really
interstate
isn't one.
commerce clauses, which the federal government could assist us with, are providing a disincentive for these large freight
So
haulers.
we're carving out part of the VW settlement funds towards electric school buses or hybrid school buses, but we have about $55 million left. And you have a really complex issue when you can't figure out how to spend $55 million. So we're going on the third legislative session. We know roughly how much money we're going to have, and trying to find the best low-hanging fruit to invest in for us has been really politically difficult. So our largest issue with diesel emissions is in and around our Portland metro area. We get an absolutely scathing middle school environmental impact statement as we were renovating, as our local Portland Public Schools was renovating one of our middle schools. They recommended that kids not play outside because of the level of diesel emissions and other toxics. They're right next to one of our largest highways. That's bad. Right. Like when you have an environmental impact statement saying kids don't go outside in your area, we need to do something. So that's
So let me
that's
ask
what we're looking to
one
invest in.
last question. I'm going to open it up for our audience to ask a few because I'm trying to be mindful of the clock. And for many states, coal is the #1 contributor of greenhouse gas emissions as a fossil fuel, and for our country, really, contributing globally. I don't know if people have coal-fired power plants in their states or not, but you may have coal as part of your energy portfolio still that you use in your state. We're trying to wean ourselves off it. Can you suggest any, I don't know, talking points when you're dealing with other states on how you can get yourself off coal in a smooth transition, jobs in some states, but it's absolutely key if the United States is going to grapple as a responsible citizen of the world of reducing climate pollution that we get off fossil fuels, oil, we talked about mobile sources, coal, and then eventually natural gas. So any concepts or ideas on how to part the
Reggie, what's
national
Reggie
debate
doing?
Okay.
on coal?
So
Do you
I'll
have
mention-
a coal-fired power plant? in New York?
We have 2 coal-fired power plants left in New York State, and I'm glad to say we will not have them by the end of 2020. Governor Cuomo is committed to phasing them out by the end of 2020, which is 10 years ahead of the Powering Past Coal goal, international goal that our states are part of. It's really sort of, and what we have also supporting that is we have a program in those 2 communities that where there's still power plants, that we have a program to provide them some relief from the lost tax revenues that they will get when these plants shut down, because they rely on them for a big chunk of their tax base. And so that's really important on the transition piece. We also see it's really important to train workers to find jobs in these new renewable industries like offshore wind, like energy storage, like renewable energy. And from a policy perspective, there's sort of a push and pull thing. You sort of push the fossil fuel business, reduce the reliance on fossil fuels through our regulation that is going to shut down the coal plants. We have another regulation that is going to require most of the dirty peaking power plants in New York State to close. We have banned fracking in New York State, so that's sort of the push. And then the pull is supporting the renewable energy replacement. And that's really how you move towards the clean energy system, that you don't need to rely on coal, and you can reduce your reliance on gas because you're building up the other sources of electricity.
Yeah, and you ramp up your renewables so
Yep.
you can replace
Right.
it.
What I think today, California will be selling solar energy to Arizona and maybe New Mexico for less. We'll be paying them to take the solar energy off the grid, because we've built an enormous solar energy portfolio, and the snow is melting, and the hydroelectric is coming on, and everybody knows that April in California and maybe May is a happy time. So the people who have coal, if we pay them to take our solar energy, that's a pretty good economic deal. With that said, what we need to do is really continue some serious discussion on a regional grid. I know people have a heartburn when you think about a Trump FERC and going and talking to those guys, but at the end of the day, what we need to do is, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, Mexico, that's easy. Nevada and Arizona would not stay out, but the big enchilada for us here is Wyoming, Montana, Utah, where the coal's at. But they also have wind and solar resources. And the idea is money talks. And if we're going to buy their resources and give them revenues, and we're one big happy Western family, that will help with the balancing authority, because there's a couple, the sun rises in the east and we're over here. All that works out. But that it's just cheap. It's just money at the end of the day will conquer. This is a
Okay.
nonprofit. I can't believe I said that.
Linda, I'm looking at you. I had put down Q&A at the end, but it dawned on me we don't have microphones set up for that. Do we? We do.
One right there.
Great. So the only rules here, and I'm a former middle school teacher, so the rule here is try to keep it to a question.
No compound
Not
questions.
a long statement, certainly not longer than all of us talking, and you can direct it to anyone you'd like. And your name and affiliation or state you're from.
Thank you so much. I'm Karin Hertzberg, Climate Counselor at the Embassy of Norway.
Oh.
So, question is, I'd like to hear more about the congestion pricing in New York City, which is an incredible news coming out here, and it's been tested in European cities. So what do you expect the effect will be in terms of emission reductions? And also to the other two, if congestion pricing is something that you would be looking at in Oregon and California. Thanks.
Okay. Jared, do you want to talk about that?
So I'm not, frankly not aware of a calculation of emission reductions. I think you need to look at it as a piece of the overall strategy. In New York, we already have the lowest per capita emissions from transportation in the country because of our transit system in New York City. And that transit system is stressed. We have a growing demands on the system, and so there's a need to invest in that system to enable people to keep using it, and that's part of what the congestion pricing will provide, and provide additional incentives for people to make use of that system. So it's gonna result in emission reductions, but it's really part of a suite of strategies. A lot of the details will still need to be worked out. The legislation for example, doesn't set the price for the congestion pricing. That will be worked out in the administrative phase over the next couple of years.
Does Oregon or California is that something you're considering statewide, or are some cities considering congestion pricing?
Yes, so in Oregon, we don't have tolling. I grew up in New Jersey, so,
Yeah.
Easy pass, you just drive all the way through.
Yeah.
I miss throwing the quarter to hit the basket, but the Oregon legislature in our 2017 transportation package enabled ODOT to look at congestion pricing on our two major highways that connect with Washington State. They kind of come through as a funnel on two different options, and then at some point largely merge and then head south. I think much like Washington State is struggling with pricing, generally it is, do you do both highways at the same time or just one that tends to be worse? That's a political question. Some of the federal delegation in Washington State does not want us to price along that way. So I've been following New York State's efforts largely when I listen to NPR in the morning, because I'm looking ahead to our future where I think delivery trucks are looking to get an exemption, taxis and others are looking to get an exemption from that. A lot of those are political questions inherent around the pricing burdens that we place on different sectors.
Sacramento looking at that as part of the Air Resources Board strategy, emission reduction, or just getting people out of their cars?
I think for the Norwegians, I would say
We love
that
Norway,
We
by
love
the way.
Norway. I was there. I was in Oslo looking at your recycling. You guys are doing a fantastic job.
I
in
was in
recycling.
Oslo where it was only Teslas and there were no other cars.
The first
in Oslo.
cab, Tesla cab, I met the guy. But what we've done here in California, we have these hot lanes where we price. You can travel on the hot lane during certain times of the day, and you'll pay an additional price, trying to put raise revenues to do that. The Bay Area, the plan is for the whole Bay Area to go to hot lanes. We have a the commuter lane, the
BART?
HOV lane. That if you have
HOV lane.
2 people or 3 people, depending on where you are, you can travel in that. The problem is there's so many cheaters that it's just crazy. As far as municipalities, we have these metropolitan planning organizations, and they're doing work on that, but I'd be lying to you if I knew where the status of that is, because it is a little hot potato.
So I think we have time for at least one more question. Where's the microphone got up?
Hi.
Yes. Your name,
I'm-
please, and where you're from?
Yes. I'm Lunava here. I'm from California Carbon. So
Let's,
I have,
make sure that we can hear you.
yeah.
Put the mic right in your.
Okay. I'm Lunava here, and I'm from California Carbon. I have a question. It was very interesting that you mentioned about adaptation in tackling climate change. So my question is actually related to the thesis I submitted recently. I'm a recent graduate from University College London. So I worked on the coastal ecosystems and looking into the 17 SDGs and 169 targets of the 2030 Agenda of United Nations. And my question is mostly on how far, like, what kind of, I looked into the synergies and trade-offs between these targets and the goals of United Nations. So my question about you to Bob here is about how did you, in the state of California, like, do you have any plans or goals, or how do you address adaptation and building resilience of communities in the state of California, and what kind of issues do you face?
I'm going to call on Senator Wieckowski because his middle name is adaptation.
Right.
He's only talked about that for the 6 years I've known him, probably 4 or 5 times a day. So Bob, take it away.
Well, the weather's changing, so I think the sales pitch on adaptation is that just turn on the weather station and watch what's going on. The plan, my big plan, is to increase the cap and trade program so we have more money to spend on adaptation. AB 671 allows us to spend money. AB 32 says from the cap and trade, we only spend the money on mitigation. And I am, if I'm nothing else, I'm stern about we're going to take the money from today's auction and spend it on mitigation. But once we get to 2020, we're more flexible on how we can spend the money on adaptation. I want to see the price go up on the cap and trade. It's at $15 and some change. I would like to be sitting here in 10 years and have it at $60. So instead of having $3 billion from our cap and trade auctions, we'd be talking about $12 billion. So we have some dough that we can put in, high-speed rail, we get 4, whatever, however it breaks up the math. But then going in at our infrastructure, take sea level rising in the Bay Area. There are a lot of people in San Francisco, and I was born in San Francisco, that like to put up seawalls. That's their answer. I'm over my dead body. I mean, there are projects that we can do to improve the rivers that flow into the bay and increase the sediment. So naturally, the sediment will go into the wetlands. The federal government, we spend a lot of money trying to artificially set up the settlement, but adjust for 1 foot of sea level rising. Just by going in and restructuring the rivers the flow that they should be. We've got roads that we put in, Highway 37, a state road that is built on a levee. It artificially blocks the bay. That has to be knocked out. A bridge has to be done so that the water, naturally, when we have these the surges of water, it can flow out into the farmland with all the cows, but then it will recede. So we're trying to take those projects that cost a lot of money, and integrate them. That's just on sea level rising. Extreme heat, the fires, we got to do, talked about the fires a little bit. Pests, once the pests come in, that's going to be we'll have a heart attack when we get the pest infestation. But we got to try to get a little bit ahead of adapting, and then absolutely all the infrastructure in LA and San Diego on the coast, we have to make sure that Caltrain, which is our transportation agency, and all the money that we spend has to be done in the adaptation lens. It's just, that party's over.
So,
This has been one of his areas of expertise, and so you can have the last word on this, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Yes, I think in large part because California is so far ahead of us in implementing this program. If you said that you're moving to a carbon price within 10 years of $60 credit, those states that are looking to hook on to the WCI, we would have a really difficult time transitioning Oregon's economy without significantly jumping price increases for our low-income and moderate-income people.
That's
So
the rub.
you know, that has been the difficulty inherent in transitioning. We need enough of a glide path that we are not disproportionately affecting people financially who are already disproportionately impacted by climate change and least able to transition. But I think to your question, if I can jump in, it's going to be based on where you live. My Coast Range and my colleagues there, as we're looking to stand up this program, desperately need money, not for transit, but because their highways are sliding off into the ocean. We have twice so far this spring, we've had key pieces of 101 that have been significantly hit by flooding, and one that's just been washed out for a week or so. You can't get anybody in and out of those communities. However, in Portland, we need more transit and we can't get it fast enough. I mean, I think my colleagues from our rural parts of the state think that we have a great transit system, and my district is, part of it is largely not transit served. You have one bus you can take. We need a balance of both.
So to get back to Terry Tamminen, we have a lot of work to do, and there is a sense of urgency. But I wanted to share with you one resource. It would be remiss of me. In my post-political career, I'm the environmental policy director for the Schwarzenegger Institute. And we have this resource called envirolaws.org. You can Google that. It's policies that have passed in states all over the country. Blue states, red states, a lot from New York, Oregon, and all of them. They're all listed out, not only the law that's passed, supporters and opponents of the laws, so you know what they're. It's a concept you can modify and blend or amend to work with your state or with your city. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of examples of laws that have been implemented the last 15 years across the United States. So at the subnational level, a lot of good things are happening, and communications such as we've had today hopefully inspires all of us to do a little bit more. And I'm going to find out more about New York's energy storage. Yeah, right. I'm going to follow whether CAP invest in your policies. I know it's about that time of year that they're passing. And Bob, I leave up to you making sure the legislature is moving in the right direction. So thank you very much for allowing us to spend an hour with you this morning.
Fran,